It was one of those days at work that felt like everything that could go wrong did. I had been wrestling with a problem all morning. A major shipment had been returned due to a mistake, and I was trying to figure out how to fix it. I was already overwhelmed, my head spinning with thoughts of how to salvage the situation when, just to make matters worse, I somehow managed to spill coffee all over myself. The hot liquid soaked through my shirt, leaving a dark stain that seemed to mirror the growing frustration inside me. I sighed, rubbing my face with one hand, and tried to push through the frustration. But just as I was starting to think the day couldn't possibly get worse, the phone rang. Call came around 2 p.m., an unexpected interruption from a local hospital. The voice on the other end was calm, but it carried an urgency that immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. The news they gave me was a punch to the gut. My wife, Laura, had been in a serious car accident. At first, I couldn't fully process what I was hearing. Laura? In an accident? Didn't make sense. Laura had never driven a car in her life. She had always preferred public transportation or, if necessary, a ride from me. My thoughts raced, my mind struggling to grasp the situation. Was this a mistake? Could they have confused her with someone else? I couldn't get my head around it, but the panic was already creeping in. I needed to get to the hospital to see her for myself to make sure she was okay. I rushed out of the office, barely stopping to grab my things. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. With every passing minute, I imagined the worst, my mind conjuring up scenarios that I didn't want to believe were possible. I kept telling myself it had to be some kind of mix-up, that it wasn't as bad as they said. When I arrived, the air inside the hospital felt suffocating. I was ushered through the sterile halls, my heart pounding in my chest. A nurse met me with a look of sympathy that immediately told me something was terribly wrong. She explained that Laura was in critical condition, unconscious, and they didn't know if she would survive. The words hit me like a cold wave. Felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. I stumbled to the waiting room, my mind racing. I needed to see her, to hold her hand, to make sure she knew I was there. But the pain in my chest grew even deeper when I overheard a conversation among two doctors near the hallway. They were talking about Laura's condition, but they also mentioned something that made my heart stop. Another man. They said Laura had been with someone else at the time of the accident, someone who was also injured. I froze, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. My mind couldn't reconcile what I was hearing. I was too numb, too overwhelmed by everything that had already happened. Felt like the whole world had suddenly turned upside down, and nothing made sense anymore. Then, just when I thought I couldn't bear any more heartache, a miracle happened. Laura briefly regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment it felt like everything would be okay. She reached out weakly, her voice hoarse as she whispered my name. Through her pain, she told me she loved me and she asked for my forgiveness. Her words were soft, but they hit me like a tidal wave. My heart swelled with both love and sorrow, a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to describe. But it wasn't enough. Her strength faded quickly, and within moments her eyes closed again, this time for good. Laura slipped away, leaving me in a daze, too stunned to fully comprehend what had just happened. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to move forward. It was all too much. How could this be real? How could my life, my world, change in an instant like this? That day, I learned a harsh truth about how fragile life is, how quickly things can unravel. And in the aftermath, I was left with nothing but the overwhelming pain of losing the one person I had always thought I could count on. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and heartbreak. I was trapped in a haze, moving through the motions but never fully present. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't find comfort at home. The emptiness of the house where Laura and I had spent so many quiet nights together was deafening. The silence seemed to echo with memories of her laugh, the way she'd smile when I made her morning coffee, or the soft hum of her voice as she read aloud from her favorite book. I couldn't shake the questions that haunted me. Why was she with someone else? What did that mean for our relationship? Was there something I didn't know? I wanted answers, but at the same time I was afraid to seek them out. Truth felt like it would rip me apart even further, and yet the unknown was like a gnawing ache, a wound that couldn't heal until it was addressed. I spent hours in the house alone, thinking back to every conversation we had ever shared. What had I missed? Had there been signs? My mind replayed the events leading up to her death in an endless loop. The morning of the accident seemed like a lifetime ago. She had kissed me goodbye before heading out to run some errands, nothing out of the ordinary. There had been nothing unusual in the days before. And yet, suddenly, everything had changed. A week later, I returned to the hospital, this time to settle the inevitable logistics, to finalize the arrangements. I stood in front of her doctors, a knot tightening in my chest, asking questions I never thought I'd need answers to. I had to face the reality of the situation, the brutal facts. Laura had indeed been with another man that day, a man she had been seeing in secret. His name was Mark, and he, too, had been seriously injured in the accident. He was alive, but just barely. The doctors explained the details, and I stood there, motionless, as they spoke of his condition. The floodgates of grief opened. I could feel the anger rising within me, mixing with the pain of losing Laura, of finding out that she had betrayed me. I had so many questions, so many emotions that I didn't know how to process. How could she have done this to me? Why didn't she tell me? I thought we were happy, that we were solid. The feelings of betrayal were like a heavy weight on my chest, suffocating me. I tried to avoid the hospital after that day. The thought of seeing Mark, seeing the man who had been with my wife, was too much. But the emotions continued to swirl within me, and I realized I couldn't keep running from them. I had to face the pain, to come to terms with what had happened. A few months later, I found myself back at the hospital, but this time I wasn't alone. I had made the decision to meet with Mark. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew I needed to face him. I walked into the sterile room where he was recovering, his face pale and bruised. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide with surprise and something else, guilt maybe? He didn't know how to speak, and neither did I. The silence between us was deafening. Eventually, Mark spoke. He apologized, his voice hoarse, and I could see the regret in his eyes. He explained that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that it had all started as something small, something that didn't seem so significant at first. But things had gotten out of hand. It wasn't enough to ease my pain, but I could see that he was genuinely remorseful. That conversation didn't give me the closure I had hoped for, but it did something else. It allowed me to start healing. Slowly, painfully, I realized that the answers I sought weren't going to make everything right. No amount of explanations, no amount of apologies would bring Laura back or fix what had been broken. What I had to do was let go of the anger, the confusion, the hurt, and learn how to move forward. In the months that followed, I found myself starting over. I focused on the things that had once brought me joy, my work, my friends, the hobbies I had put aside. I traveled, I met new people, and I let myself heal. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others, but over time the intense pain began to dull. The memories of Laura remained, but instead of bringing sorrow, they slowly became a source of warmth. She had been an important part of my life, and I would carry her memory with me, but I couldn't let it define me. I learned that life, even when it seems like it's falling apart, keeps moving. It's cruel and unpredictable, but it also offers chances to grow, to rebuild, and to find new paths. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to embrace it, no matter how uncertain it seemed. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way to truly honor the love I had once shared with Laura.